Philadelphia, December 1945. Inside the basement of the University of Pennsylvania's Moore School of Electrical Engineering, 24-year-old Jean Jennings climbed a short stepladder between two rows of gray steel cabinets, each one 9 feet tall and lined with rows of glass tubes glowing faintly orange in the darkroom. She was hunting for a burned-out tube. This was routine. On a bad night, it could take hours, pulling tubes, testing them, replacing them, running the calculation again to see if the numbers came out right this time. Jennings and 5 other women had been recruited to program and operate a machine the Army was building to calculate artillery firing tables. The machine had a name, ENIAC, and it contained roughly 17,468 vacuum tubes wired together across 40 panels. Somewhere among those thousands of glass bulbs, one had failed again, and the entire chain of calculations behind it was now worthless. To the small team working in that basement, this was simply what running ENIAC felt like. You expected failures. You built your evening around finding them. Nobody in the room in December 1945 believed a computer built from vacuum tubes could run for very long without one of them giving out. But this wasn't normal. A machine that the U.S. Army had paid nearly $500,000 to build, a machine meant to prove that electronic computing was even possible, was regularly going dark for hours at a time because of a component that had been designed for home radios, not for a room full of switching circuits running around the clock. Somewhere in that gap between what a radio tube was built to do and what ENIAC was asking it to do, the future of computing was quietly at risk. Nobody in that basement in December 1945 could have said with confidence that the machine would ever run reliably enough to matter. What they didn't yet know was that the fix, when it finally arrived, would not come from a new part at all. The vacuum tube itself was not new in 1945. It had been the workhorse of American electronics since the 1920s, sitting inside millions of home radios, amplifiers, and telephone repeaters. But nobody had ever tried to wire together more than a few hundred of them into a single machine that had to work continuously, in exact synchronization, without a single failure breaking the chain. 5 conditions made this problem nearly impossible to avoid. A typical radio tube of the era carried an expected life measured in the low thousands of hours under normal home use, brief evenings of listening rather than round-the-clock operation. Nobody manufacturing tubes in 1945 was designing or testing for a customer that planned to run every unit simultaneously, 24 hours a day, for weeks at a stretch. Vacuum tubes were designed for intermittent home use, not continuous industrial duty. A living room radio tube spent most of its life idle, switched on for an evening broadcast, and then cooling overnight. Manufacturers such as RCA, Sylvania, and Western Electric built and rated their tubes around that pattern of use, not around a machine meant to run for days without a break. Every time a tube's heater warmed up from cold, its filament and cathode absorbed a jolt of thermal stress. ENIAC's engineers later found that most tube failures happened not while the machine was running steadily, but in the seconds of power up and power down, when the heater surged from 0 to full temperature. Wartime production had quietly lowered the average quality of American vacuum tubes. Skilled engineers and technicians who would ordinarily have refined tube manufacturing were pulled into war work between 1941 and 1945, and factories scaled up output to meet military radio and radar demand rather than tightening quality control. Vacuum tubes were designed for intermittent home use, not continuous industrial duty. A living room radio tube spent most of its life idle, switched on for an evening broadcast, and then cooling overnight. Manufacturers such as RCA, Sylvania, and Western Electric built and rated their tubes around that pattern of use, not around a machine meant to run for days without a break. Every time a tube's heater warmed up from cold, its filament and cathode absorbed a jolt of thermal stress. ENIAC's engineers later found that most tube failures happened not while the machine was running steadily, but in the seconds of power up and power down, when the heater surged from 0 to full temperature. Wartime production had quietly lowered the average quality of American vacuum tubes. Skilled engineers and technicians who would ordinarily have refined tube manufacturing were pulled into war work between 1941 and 1945, and factories scaled up output to meet military radio and radar demand rather than tightening quality control. By the second half of 1945, ENIAC's construction was nearing completion, and the pressure on the project had become impossible to ignore. The Army's Ordnance Corps, under Major General Gladion Barnes, had committed roughly $487,000 to a machine that was supposed to solve a real wartime bottleneck, calculating artillery firing tables faster than teams of human computers ever could. The war that had justified the project was ending just as the machine was being finished, which only sharpened the stakes. If ENIAC could not be shown to work reliably, the entire argument for electronic computing, an argument that had cost the Army a fortune and consumed 2 years of engineering time at the Moore School, would collapse in public. Skeptics in the electronics field had already gone on record predicting that a machine built from thousands of vacuum tubes would fail constantly and prove useless. Inside the Moore School, the daily reality was already testing that prediction. Several tubes were burning out almost every day, and by some accounts, the machine sat non-functional roughly half the time. A public unveiling was being planned for February 1946, an event that would put ENIAC in front of journalists, military brass, and the scientific establishment. A machine that went dark every few hours was not a machine anyone could demonstrate with confidence. The team could not simply wait for better tubes. High-reliability tubes built specifically for continuous duty machines like ENIAC did not exist yet. They would not reach the market until 1948, 2 years after ENIAC needed to work. Whatever fix emerged had to come from how the tubes already on hand were used, not from a new generation of hardware nobody could get in time. There was also a quieter, more personal pressure on the engineering team. ENIAC's construction had already run well past its original budget, ballooning from an early estimate near $150,000 to a final cost of roughly $487,000. Army officers overseeing the Ordnance Corps' research and development budget were watching a wartime project finish just as the war it was built for was ending, which meant the case for continuing to fund electronic computing now rested entirely on whether this one machine could prove itself in front of an audience. The person closest to that problem was Presper Eckert, ENIAC's 26-year-old chief engineer. Eckert had grown up in Philadelphia, tinkering with radio equipment as a teenager, and he arrived at the University of Pennsylvania's Moore School of Electrical Engineering as a graduate student rather than a tenured professor. His partner on the project, physicist John Mauchly, supplied much of the theoretical case for an electronic computer. Eckert was the one who had to make thousands of individual circuits actually behave. Colleagues described him as intensely hands-on, the kind of engineer who wanted to test a component himself rather than trust a manufacturer's datasheet. He was known for a low tolerance for sloppy engineering and a habit of pushing back hard when he thought a design decision was being made for convenience rather than reliability. In an era when computing was still theoretical to most of the country, Eckert's contribution was almost entirely practical, keeping thousands of ordinary radio parts working together as one machine. He spent his days moving between panels with a notepad, tracking which circuits ran hot, which tubes seemed to fail more often than others, and which off-the-shelf parts, ordered from distributors in batches of 1,000 because that was all the wartime supply chain could offer, behaved differently from batch to batch. It was unglamorous, repetitive work, closer to a mechanic diagnosing an engine than to the popular image of a scientific breakthrough. He was not a distant genius handing down solutions from a blackboard. He was the engineer in the room deciding, tube by tube, circuit by circuit, how hard each component would be allowed to work. That decision, more than any single invention, would determine whether ENIAC succeeded or joined the list of wartime projects that never quite worked. Waiting for better tubes. The most obvious fix was to simply use more reliable tubes, but the high-reliability tube types built for continuous industrial and military duty were still years away from production. Special tubes rated for the kind of sustained operation ENIAC required were not available until 1948. Eckert's team needed a solution using the same off-the-shelf radio tubes any hobbyist could buy from a distributor in lots of 1,000, since that was all the wartime supply chain could reliably provide. Even asking manufacturers to hand-select their best tubes from existing production runs offered little help. The team was already using 10 different tube types, and by Eckert's own account, they could have gotten by with 4 types if supply had allowed it. There simply weren't enough premium-grade tubes being made anywhere in the country to fill a machine that needed 17,468 of them. Building for fast repair instead of fewer failures. ENIAC was built as a modular machine, with each function housed in its own panel, so a technician could pull and replace a section quickly. This helped enormously with locating problems, and by the team's own account, a failed tube could usually be found within about 15 minutes. But faster repair did not mean fewer failures. It treated the symptom, not the cause, and a machine that broke down predictably every few hours was still not a machine anyone could trust for an important demonstration. Scheduled preventive replacement. Another approach borrowed from radio repair shops. Replace tubes on a fixed schedule before they were expected to fail, the way a mechanic changes a car's oil before it breaks down. In practice, this was expensive and wasteful, since a scheduled swap could pull a tube that still had plenty of life left in it, while tubes that were nowhere near their expected replacement date kept failing anyway. The pattern that mattered wasn't age. It was stress at the moments of power up and power down, and no fixed replacement calendar could account for that. None of these approaches addressed the actual mechanism behind the failures. The team was managing symptoms while the underlying cause, the electrical stress every tube endured each time it was switched on and off, kept producing new failures faster than any repair schedule could keep up with. Eckert's fix cost essentially nothing to manufacture. It was not a new component, a redesigned circuit, or an expensive substitute part. It was a decision about how the existing tubes would be operated, and it rested on two connected ideas he and the team put into practice. The first was voltage derating, running every tube's heater and filament below its rated maximum voltage, rather than at the edge of the manufacturer's specification. Pushing a tube to its rated limit maximized brightness and output on paper, but it also maximized wear. By keeping the tubes comfortably under that ceiling, the team traded a small amount of theoretical performance for a large gain in operating life. The second was even simpler, and in its way, more radical. Stop turning the machine off. Because most failures happen during the thermal shock of warm-up and cool-down, rather than during steady, continuous operation, the safest thing to do with a vacuum tube was to leave it on. ENIAC's engineers concluded that if the heaters never had to surge from cold to full temperature over and over, the tubes would last far longer than intermittent use would ever allow.
We decided that our tube filaments would last a lot longer if we kept them below their proper voltage, Eckert later recalled of the approach his team settled on. Together, derated voltage and continuous operation turned ENIAC's tube failures from a near-constant disruption into a manageable, almost routine maintenance rhythm. Instead of several burnouts a day and a machine that was down roughly half the time, the team brought failures down to about one tube every 2 days, typically located within about 15 minutes. The logic behind it, once stated plainly, seems obvious in hindsight. A light bulb rarely burns out while it's glowing steadily in a lamp. It usually fails at the instant it's switched on, when the cold filament takes the full shock of current all at once. Vacuum tubes behave the same way. Eckert's team simply stopped inflicting that shock on ENIAC's tubes as often as possible, and stopped asking each one to work at the outer edge of what it was rated to handle. A choice that cost nothing extra to build solved a problem the Army had spent nearly $500,000 trying to avoid. Nobody had to invent a new kind of tube or redesign ENIAC circuits. The fix was a shift in operating philosophy. Treat the components gently and stop demanding the one thing, being switched off and on, that stressed them the most. It scaled instantly across all 17,468 tubes because it required no new hardware at all, just a different set of habits for the engineers and operators running the machine every day.
ENIAC was formally unveiled at the Moore School on February 14, 1946, and ran a ballistics calculation in under 20 seconds that would have taken a human computer roughly 20 hours. The demonstration worked, and newspapers across the country covered it as a marvel, with the New York Times calling it a machine that figures like a flash. The machine was moved to the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland in 1947 and stayed in continuous operation there until October 1955. By 1954, engineers recorded a stretch of 116 straight hours, nearly 5 days, without a single tube failure, a level of reliability that would have seemed impossible to the team pulling tubes by flashlight in the Moore School basement less than a decade earlier. The principle behind Eckert's fix, running components conservatively below their rated limits rather than at their theoretical maximum, outlived ENIAC itself and became a standard practice in electronics engineering, showing up later in the reliability discipline that guided transistor and integrated circuit design as the industry moved beyond vacuum tubes entirely.
Eckert and Mauchly left the University of Pennsylvania in 1946 to found the Eckert-Mauchly Computer Corporation, work that eventually became UNIVAC and helped launch the commercial computer industry in America. Jean Jennings and the 5 other women who programmed and operated ENIAC, Kathleen McNulty, Frances Billos, Ruth Lichterman, Betty Snyder, and Marlon Westkoff, went unnamed at the 1946 unveiling and remained largely uncredited in the historical record for decades afterward, even though their work was what actually made the machine produce usable results. The financial case for the fix was almost embarrassingly small next to the problem it solved. The Army had committed roughly $487,000, equivalent to several $1,000,000 today, to build a machine that skeptics said would never run reliably. The solution that made it work cost nothing beyond a decision: run the tubes a little easier and stop switching them off. No new contract, no redesigned hardware, no additional line item in Ordnance Corps paperwork. Just a change in habit that 17,000 tubes quietly benefited from every single day. Today, Eckert's tube derating decision is a footnote inside a footnote, overshadowed by ENIAC's own fame and later eclipsed entirely by the transistor and the microchip. But every engineer who has ever run a critical system a little below its rated limit for the sake of reliability, from server farms to spacecraft, is following a habit an obsessive 26-year-old first proved out on a basement full of glowing radio tubes in Philadelphia. The best engineering becomes invisible.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget, like and subscribe for more video.